Hi. So I'm Alex Balashov. I've been doing Camelio work predominantly for about 15, 20 years, something like that. Come from Athens, Georgia, it's a small college town outside of Atlanta. Very happy to be at ClueCon. Haven't been here since 2014. Really love the energy. We'll definitely be back if they'll have me. But in keeping with the sort of contrarian pedigree of this conference, because I've heard ClueCon is, iconoclastic and spicy, we're going to be doing farm animals on the remaining slides. Found this slide. I found this slide deck when I searched for agriculture and livestock related presentation templates, which is a rarefied and thin space, but it's more lively and dynamic than you might expect. So yeah, if farm animals are triggering for you, you may wish to reconsider this talk. So the theme of my talk is antipatterns, which is a computer science-y term for things not to do. Nerds like to invent esoteric terms for concepts that already exist and are covered by a more general word. So instead of saying, work product or the resulting code or something, we say deliverables, right? Well, anti-patterns come from that general litany. If you've heard of best practices, we follow best practices around here. These are like worst practices. And specifically, they're worst practices in the design of VoIP service delivery platforms, which is what I build. So in order to qualify as an anti-pattern, a one-off bad implementation or a screw-up's probably not sufficient. It needs to be generalizable enough that you've cataloged it in the wild. And, it needs to be worth cataloging for the benefit of humanity in someone's eyes, presumably. You can look for anti-patterns on Wikipedia. It's not a term I made up. But doing what I do for this long, I'm very often asked to build the same thing over and over, which is actually why we have a SIP routing platform product. For instance, somewhere between, the Cambrian explosion and the Jurassic period, now that I think about it, we were asked to build numerous SIP trunking platforms from scratch, which before I got the bright idea to kind of codify this into a reference implementation, which became our CSRP product. But that kind of experience is actually really good for observing anti-patterns because it controls for differences in requirements, between the requirements and what's being built. So I can compare apples to apples more often than not. If you're doing the same thing over and over again, that's a really good launching pad for seeing what not to do, as opposed to building lots of different kinds of things and then finding really bespoke and niche things not to do in every instance. So while this class 4 and tandem switch trunking space is my bread and butter, I've consulted on facets of a lot of class 5 and PBX platforms as well. And sometimes my solutions are called upon to work around problems or limitations arising from poor engineering of class 5 switch platform choices as well. So that provides another window into what's commonly done wrong. I want to say one more thing just on the meta front, which is that, the title of my talk, distributed VoIP Softswitch design in the name, it implies a very technical focus. But of course, nothing exists in like an acontextual vacuum. So business strategic choices are about technology management are of course very entwined with, propeller head engineering choices, and that's important. So I'll mention some business decisions too. The first one, it's probably one of the most common things I've seen, is the wrong kind of technical DNA in the organization that acquires a VoIP company. So the acquirer buys a company with a custom open source platform. Maybe they're buying it for the platform, maybe they're buying it for maybe it's just a customer grab, maybe both. But let's say, for example, the acquirer is a sales-focused shop or kind of an enterprise beast that has always bought, big box, big brand stuff. BroadSoft, Oracle, Cisco. I know BroadSoft doesn't exist anymore, but let's say their entire workforce, business processes, troubleshooting, institutional memory, break fix, knowledge, it's all designed to consume the big enterprise platforms. Now, I think a lot of us in this room already know that post-acquisition integration efforts very often go poorly. But the fantasy is that you're pulling some sort of zipper, pulling along like an elegant merger of two organizations' technologies based on what fits where in the best bucket and brings the most value in the right situation at the right time. It doesn't really work that way in reality. There's a lot of outright assimilation failures out there, layoffs, waste, conflict, etc. I guess life is but a series of disappointments. But the essence of this item isn't really about integration pains generically. I'm thinking about a company that makes a bid for an open source technology play without understanding that buying that kind of technology requires a lot of internal care and feeding and commitment and resistance to bit rot and entropy. And there's a certain life cycle that comes with open source that's very different than buying enterprise or proprietary. An open source technology stack, I think we can all agree, is engineering heavy. And pretty much no matter what you buy, and it requires a pretty engineering-heavy corporate culture. So even if you've built a high-level proprietary platform on top of an open-source technology stack, I think it's safe to say that it's going to require more care, feeding, maintenance, and understanding of the internals than a proprietary platform that's, one of the majors. So you need company culture, talent, team composition, and of course, the management domain knowledge to properly metabolize what can sometimes be a very highly technical science project. And there's not a lot of acquirers in telecom. Not a lot of technical acquirers anyway. I mean, I guess if you get bought by Google, I don't think you're going to have this problem. But you might also get bought by some dull-witted MBA frat boys who think they can run, I don't know, a $500 million company out of a quarter cab or a few EC2 instances or something. Do I seem like I have an axe to grind? These are the cousins of the kind of finance bros who view programming as like a fancy form of typing, and they just want short, bald dudes like me to roll out a new feature by tonight. Do some nerd shit real quick. So now you might say that's, that kind of company is ill-equipped to do much of anything, but if that were true, they wouldn't have $500 million. I mean, it doesn't really matter where they got it. It could be some poor pension fund's money or actual subscriber revenue, bank-issued debt instruments, black market howitzers, harvesting the organs of orphans. They've got $500 million. So it becomes a question of deploying capital efficiently, right? So traditional big box enterprise brands, as well as the white label resale platforms of today, they really do cater to this efficiently. This is perhaps their central value proposition. They really are turnkey if you're just a sales shop of the kind that I'm alluding to here. And, that type of organization can't really take a stake in the care and feeding of something technical. As far as technology goes, they don't really know anything, and neither do the people they employ, by and large. I mean, they vary. It's not one or the other, but by and large, that's more true than not. So the essence of the anti-pattern here, why is this a thing worth cataloging, is when you get that type of company, they either don't realize that buying an open source platform has a lot of technical moving parts that they need to intricately invest themselves in, or they do understand that on some level, but they don't understand what kind of company they are and what kind of people they actually have. Maybe they think they do have an engineering apparatus. So I've seen quite a few acquisitions by now where the open source platform that the acquirer paid dearly for, believing that it's going to be the basis of some promising new business unit, just gets, written down, shut down, and mothballed after a while. Because the acquirer just doesn't really know what to do with it. They got a bunch of, open source assets, and, the founders and the technical A-team from the company they bought, had been running it until their earnout ran out, and then at 11:59 on the day it runs out, they pieced out, and now what? Some companies, of course, have a deeper bench of competency to deal with that, but more often they're not, they're buying customers or market access or whatever. They're not buying the technical platforms as a matter of CapEx, but sometimes they get the platform anyway. The build or buy dilemma, isn't as stark for a more technical company with a deeper bench, because at least in principle they could build something to replace it, instrument migrations and so on. But it's the people who can't build anything themselves who buy companies with a platform for the platform. In other words, those who can do, and those who can't pay eye-watering valuations for intellectual property. So this leads to the rather perverse outcome that the companies who need to take the most cold-eyed and critical look at their ability to metabolize, some pile of FreeSwitch asterisk, Camellia, OpenSIPs, whatever stuff they bought, are the least able to do it. And that's why these acquisitions have a way of going bad, not necessarily with a bang. It can be a very protracted whimper, but they have an exceptionally low track record. So you need to understand where you are in this taxonomy. Database as an interprocess communication mechanism is so widely lampooned that I think it dominated the website, thedailywtf.com, in the mid-2000s, and it has its own Wikipedia entry for general, software antipatterns. So we're in 2025, so this has got a lot better. This message was probably more resonant like 10 years ago, but developers who don't really know how to make robust back-end services that talk to each other will tend, all other things being equal, to use a SQL table as an intermediary or a queue for that purpose. They'll write request or response data into a table, and then one or more other processes will read it and they'll delete the row they read. Databases aren't designed for ephemeral, short-term, real-time data. Databases are for storing data. They're a base of data. So they're not engineered for that kind of usage at all. So with their ACID compliance, transaction isolation, synchronization of storage before returning transactions and statements, the fact that they accumulate row and index bloat from highly volatile table data that constantly turns over, they're obviously not a good queuing mechanism. SQL is also a very expansive query language and has to be parsed, fed into a query planner, and all this other technical prep work. And, if there's multiple services consuming it on the read side, like shown in my little picture here, there's still synchronization problems to be solved. And then, databases are just rather slow. I mean, the design goal of databases is integrity and durability, not really message passing performance. In the telephony and telecom space, we're usually dealing with delay-sensitive and real-time systems. So I think this is more of a concern for us than it is for someone building some sort of website. Some databases have features to ease some of this pain, like in-memory tables, but there's just still gnashing of teeth that comes from utilizing something in a staggeringly suboptimal way. It's like putting the milk back into the cow. So historically, this problem was so widespread because web application developers weren't systems programmers and they didn't know how to write robust back-end code. And the alternative might have been custom services or writing socket code and the like, or figuring out something complicated like Corbo or XML-RPC or whatever. And you still needed some real architecture skills to make that kind of service work well. There were performance and scaling challenges to solve at that level. So you might say, okay, fine, well, why not just switch to a different communication mechanism later? Well, if you can do that, I guess it's not a problem for you. The whole reason this is an anti-pattern is because one does not simply swap out such an integral piece of core tech later. You're pretty married to the foundational architectural choices you make. So you really should look before you commit. There's fewer excuses for this in 2025 between AMQP and NATS and Kafka, all that, those types of centralized message queues. They've been around for a long time now. There's Redis PubSub, which is a very popular solution to this problem. If you don't know how to set anything up at all, this stuff is all distributed as containers. AWS offers SQS, simple queue service, as do the other public cloud majors. So I think I look forward to the day when we stop abusing databases for this kind of role. This is kind of a weird one. My colleague Kent Adams and I from WeGotYou.Tech went back and forth on this one. He gave me some good energy for it. In this crowd in particular, I think we often obsess over back-end scalability and back-end performance and maybe even over-engineer back-end scalability, and that's kind of what gets the press and the lion's share of the attention. But the front end has to be engineered for growth too. If you're the nature of your product is such that it has one on the front of the stack. Front end can be crucial to user experience, especially if you offer like a low-touch self-service customer portal or whatnot. The back-end guys might downplay this. You know, a lot of people say, "Oh, it's just a website. We'll throw it behind an Nginx load balancer and add more servers." Sometimes that works if your front end is properly architected, but oftentimes, though, the front end is coupled with other processes, scripts, or database interactions so that the presentation side cannot be clearly disentangled from other parts of the system. This is most commonly a special case of the more general problem of excessive coupling, I suppose, where concerns aren't separated enough in the design of the system. So the common denominator here is just that the front end isn't just the front end after all. It does a lot of other stuff, kicks off back-end jobs or scripts, things that have to be run locally, things that are run via the system routine. I've seen this a lot in environments where PHP is still a reigning technology, since PHP easily bleeds over into usage as a general purpose programming runtime. So PHP web pages beget PHP cron jobs and PHP actuated business processes, and now they all have to, you know, run together in some sort of interdependent zoo. And it's not a simple matter of adding another server to serve more HTML, JS, CSS to the user. It's also possible to do this with Node for largely the same reasons, but you know, Node at least forces you to confront and take more explicit ownership of, you know, what's in your event loop to deal with asynchrony and callbacks and so forth. PHP really is a menace in this regard. It can just proliferate like this kaleidoscopic mixture of web pages, scripts, jobs. And my goal isn't to trash PHP. You can architect good software in PHP. It's clean, modular, functionally decomposed, you know, low coupling, high cohesion design is absolutely possible in PHP. But it's been my recurring observation that people who like PHP like to use it for all kinds of different things, some of which are only very loosely connected to the presentation layer of the front end. This was a bit of a problem with Perl and CGI back in the day too, but apparently that's not a thing anymore. Anyway, so when you complicate and entangle your front end, it may not be easy to just stamp out more instances of it in a fungible way that we think about, like in terms of horizontal scaling. So you might think this is bike shedding a really niche concern, but I've actually seen some companies' growth very substantially hindered by this issue rather than back-end scalability. Yeah, so don't make a messy front end that has a lot of tentacles, that does lots of other things that aren't necessarily overtly related to front-end duties. Forklift migrations from the bare metal to the cloud are something I could probably spend a whole day on. There's this, even in 2025, you know, cloud computing's been with us as a hype cycle since the early 2010s, and I think the temperature has gone down from boiling to fairly tepid on that, but still, there's a lot of folks that, you know, this stuff has a long tail, who are just now thinking about moving traditional, you know, bare metal and dedicated server infrastructure to the cloud and don't really get cloud. And you got to get cloud before you do cloud. I think this problem is better understood than it was when I was talking about it in the mid-late 2010s, but it's still a major theme for telecom because, like I said, this stuff has a long tail. So it's very common for communications platforms designed for a traditional server environment, you know, to be asked by customers or prospects, you know, does it run in the cloud? And there's this enormous pressure to say yes. And when that customer calls that in, you know, you get an AMI image. There, bam, cloud. But as we know, the unit economics of cloud providers just don't really support this approach. In particular, the oversubscription model of the big cloud players rewards a large number of small instances over a small number of big ones. The server that you were paying $100 a month for goes to, you know, $1,200 a month. So if you were to provision it one for one. So if you've got a highly centralized design and have marinated and luxuriated in, you know, big fat server boxes with massive amounts of RAM and CPU, you just take that and you just carry it over to AWS or Azure or something. As I'm sure most folks in this room know, your cost will go up astronomically. And besides that, cloud native design requires this entirely different, more updated DevOps skill set. You need to be proficient with configuration management and infrastructure as code tools. to understand the full picture of cloud costs, the fully burdened picture that includes stuff like transit bandwidth or I/O limits or whatnot, and how to do service discovery and architecture in that kind of environment. Even if you're not really leveraging the cloud vendors, higher level tooling, you're still going to encounter that stuff. Can't just spin up a bunch of big EC2 instances and say we're in the cloud now. So, the big issue here is we're all clued in on this here at ClueCon, but there's the real world institutions, agencies, organizations, and management cultures move at a very different pace. So I'm not saying, by the way, that a fully actualized cloud deployment requires embracing a bunch of proprietary cloud vendor tooling. But if you think you can just take a service that used to run on dedicated servers and put it into giant AWS instances, you're going to have a very rude technical awakening. If you're bringing a traditional architecture with you on your cloud journey, you really should take the time to consider what are the business cases there, what the pot is at the end of the rainbow, and engage with the right expertise to reality test it and evaluate your architectural flexibility before you make the move. Don't try to fix the plane while it's flying and carrying 3 armored vehicles in the cargo hold, Finally, we've got flashy and unpragmatic technology choices. I only have a few minutes here, so I'll try not to spend too much time on it. This is not historically a huge problem in telecom, which has relatively conservative instincts, but I think what's happened is that there's been a little bit of Silicon Valley web economy culture bleed over into this area. I think that before you start making fashionable technology choices off the beaten path, you need to kind of humble yourself before the inherently conservative intuition of telecom. We're about enabling reliable, real-time business-critical communication. It needs to work reliably, sound good, needs to be engineered to a high standard. We're regulated. Infrastructure fundamentals and redundancy are important. People count on telecom. So I think there's this little bit of bleed from the Silicon Valley web economy in which culture is everything. Like if we write our service delivery core in some obscure dialect of Lisp or whatever, we can get the smartest kids between Palo Alto and Redwood City to come work for us, especially if we have, foosball and gluten-free, ethically sourced, on-site caprese salads and agentic AI and other things. Well, whatever. Just think about whether that's a growth formula that you can replicate. If by chance, you live in a reality where that's not true, consider a different path. Can you find development staff as your company grows? Can you afford to? Do you have enough atmospheric exposure to the ecology of your chosen technology choices to have some amount of reliable intuition about who the good people are and what competence in this area looks like? If you want someone to buy, license, partner with, or somehow extend what you've built, will they understand it? Will it be legible to them? Do they even know what it is? Will they think they can scale it with their own institutional inertia, prevailing corporate culture and budget? You can make this mistake the other way too. If you build your stack entirely in Node and TypeScript, you'll have no shortage of applicants, but are these the applicants you want? Maybe. But you should, if you were to ask me whether the bigger danger is too much or too little, in other words, choosing something moderately ubiquitous but moderately unsuitable versus obscure, I think obscure does more harm. I think Timothy Harrison's Kazoo presentation really drove this home for me yesterday. As I was thinking about it, I thought, oh, you want to write your platform in Erlang because it's concurrent? Because it's concurrency is a first-class citizen? Are you feeling the concurrency now? Who out there knows Erlang? I know some of you know Erlang, but clearly a lot of people have had to muddle through learning Erlang for the sake of Kazoo. So if you care about hiring developers who can actually work on your product off the street, or reducing your business risk, or limiting your personal involvement, after your exit, or anything else that relates to this thing living beyond and outside of you, you probably should have written it in Java or Go or Python or something. I'm obviously not against adopting new languages or innovation. And of course, technologies have the ability to change status. Otherwise, nothing new would ever get adopted. Rust doesn't seem as ludicrous a technology choice for core tech as it did 5 years ago, but I don't know. I think, big fortunes have been made betting against the instincts of people like me, but are you going to make a big fortune with your OCaml Softswitch? Maybe I just lack vision, as Erlich Bachman would say, But I know if this were a slightly different type of gathering, there'd be OCaml and Erlang enthusiasts leaping angrily to their feet, but I come in peace. But you get my point. You need to put down the pipe and think very soberly about your business goals if you're going to choose a technology like Haskell or OCaml or some obscure language in a bid to lure the fashionably minded. I think consumability to the rest of the world is a much more important choice when in our particular sector. I think that's all I got. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I hope you guys like my animals.
Thank you, Alex. I think it's the most animal-friendly presentation we've had so far. There is time to ask Alex a question or two if you'd like to. I'm looking around the room. There's one at the back from Jason. Boatman is behind you with a mic.
Hi. Oh, but I know, yes. It was named after me. The JSON format was, no, it wasn't. Hi, I actually have an interesting, this was a really interesting talk, and I was wondering how you feel sort of the ethics and how we're going to bridge the ethics of humanity and owning the planet versus that sort of capitalist mindset of making sure that we're always optimizing for profit and whatnot. I'd just love to know your thoughts on that.
Well, it's a difficult tension to resolve, and I don't think I could do it within the time allotted. I was a philosophy major back in the day. I have a lot of thoughts. No, I'm kidding. But it's... I don't think the angle that I really wanted to take was necessarily that we should optimize for profit. It's just pragmatism. I think our industry is more pragmatism driven and pragmatism informed than some other R&D heavy greenfield kind of stuff. Now there was a time when a lot of us got into this in the 90s and 2000s when it was greenfield. So it's not as if it doesn't change color, but I think there's almost a level of social responsibility to build a communications platform that people depend on that can be serviced if you get hit by a bus. And I think that was my overarching point, at least in that dimension.
You feel you got value there, Jason? Good. Okay. There's Jack. And there's Boatman with your microphone, Jack.
So Super Talk, really edgy, but you didn't touch anything on AI. And I thought you would have found some dimension of AI to give a little snark to.
Just stop right there for a minute, Jack.
Yes?
If Alex had put AI, which animal would have been on the screen?
That was my question.
Ah, okay.
No. I was just wanting to know. So I thought you would have some sort of eye roll about vibe coding. Or I thought you would have had some kind of a something, because I just wanted to know did you deliberately set it aside because you're on topic with so many of your anti-patterns. I just was wondering if any of that crossed into your anti-pattern space, or you're just deliberately being polite and.
I mean, it's such a new space. Well, I was making fun of Erlang, right? So I was thinking, well, does AI add a new dimension to this? I mean, as I understand it, the purpose of Node was to give front-end developers the illusion that they could write robust back-end code, and obviously AI has amplified that type of ideation a lot. So I guess you could ask ChatGPT to teach me Erlang, but please avoid references to self-harm. And but no, I think anti-patterns by definition are looking backwards. They have a certain historicism to them. It's very difficult to find anti-patterns and long-term trends in telecom mergers and acquisitions from extrapolating from the past, 2 or 3 years of this AI cultural moment we're having.
Thank you, Alex. Chris, in the hat. I saw you hands flailing around. Hold on a minute, we'll get you a mic. There you go.
Chris, my opinions are my own. There was a brief, just a bit of a point of reference there, point of order maybe perhaps. There was a reference to Silicon Valley culture in that particular portion where there was a slight dig at agentic AI as something along with organic caprese salads as an offering and foosball and such. So it was very quick, though. So just the tiniest bit.
There you go.
Of
Chris is helping you out there, Jack.
It's like stepping on a bug when you're taking a walk.
Now we've got Felix in on the act as well. Come on.
I think you must be a kindred spirit. A lot of boxes ticked, but I would say with respect to the eye, probably the stuff that's not said is what matters here, right? It's like negative space. Look at what is not said.
Definitely a less is more approach. Thank you, Felix. Thank you indeed. Okay, let's give Alex a big round of applause and a thank you. Oh,
Thank you.
Michael had his hand up just as we were doing that, Boatman. Can you just pop him the mic? One more question. This is a bonus question for Alex.
Thank you for the talk. I just wanted to give a quick, probably I don't know what you think about, you seem to be advocating for over-engineering, even in certain instances, some of these tools that you're kind of, if I might say, might be helpful in situations where you don't have to over-engineer something that might be really straightforward.
Are you talking about the cloud stuff? Yeah. I can appreciate that tension as well. I think the goal isn't necessarily to say please adopt an overly elaborate web of cloud-native tooling, but rather that insofar as you have tooling, you need to understand what the new tooling is if you're going to move to that environment, or you're not going to be able to reap its economic rewards very well. At least that was the needle I was trying to thread.
Thank you, Alex. Did you get a good answer there, Michael? Are you a happy man? Great. Third round of applause for Alex.